Diamonds in the rough or cubic zirconia? Mike Gianella from Baseball Prospectus helps us look at some of the breakout players that are drafted after post 200, like 200th pick in ADP. Coming up next on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Jeff Erickson here with Mike Gianella from Baseball Prospectus. Mike, welcome to our annual talk.
Hey, yeah, it's great to be here. It's funny. I listen to you or a RotoWire podcast like maybe twice a week on my runs, and I listen to 1.5 speeds. So I was like, "Why is the song so slow?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay, it's live and it's at normal speed."
That's right. I do the same when I'm walking the dog in the mornings. I'll listen to, I there are so many great podcasts right now that I probably listen to like 1/100th of the good content that's out there. In part because just there's a bandwidth issue, and in part I kind of feel like I don't want to steal other people's stuff. So sometimes I don't listen just so I can come up with my own takes.
Yeah, so I don't listen to you and Scott until after I write my FAAB column, and partially it's because I don't want, it's the same thing. I don't want to seem like I'm stealing from you. Sometimes I come up with the same stuff organically, which, happens. We've both been doing this a long time. But yeah, I don't want it to be like, oh, like this sounds way too much like what Jeff and Scott were talking about, which, it almost can't be helped.
Yeah, and that's, we all look at the same stats to start off with there and the same player pool, so it's easy. It's tough to be original sometimes, but it's also a good problem. It just means we're a growing industry, a maturing industry, and you and I have been doing this for a really long time. How long ago did you get started with BP?
I've been with BP now 10 years, believe it or not. So before that, I don't know if you remember, I had like my own blog for a few years. So I've probably been doing this for about 15 years total, but I've been with BP for 10 years.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Love BP. From the inception, I'm still really good friends with Joe Sheehan, with a lot of the good folks there. Christina Carl is obviously also a huge impact. Even when they don't do fantasy specific content, it's always impactful for what they've done, for how I've approached fantasy and just in consuming baseball.
Yeah, Jay Jaffe was there like as I was, he was kind of leaving as I was coming in. He's great. And then some of the younger people now, like Robert Orr, Mike Yehedo, it's just so many people come in and out of there, and it's just a great like place to kind of cut your teeth, or some people just do it part-time, but just so much good analysis for sure.
Yep, exactly. Let's talk about some of the news items before we get into our factor flukish type of discussion. I don't want to steal from baseball. Speaking of stealing, for Baseball HQ's title, I'm always on the panel for First Pitch Arizona for factor fluke. So diamonds in the rough or cubic zirconia. Guys, can we count on them after the breakouts? But before we do that, a couple of top items. Kris Bryant, unfortunately, went on the IL today with a heel bruise, retroactive to yesterday. He battled plantar fasciitis in this same foot last year. Obviously was a huge problem for him.
Yeah, and I hate the injury prone label, but it just always has been something with him, like especially the last 2 or 3 years. And it's the thing too, where when he's on the field, it seems to impact his production. He's never really been the hitter that he was like for those 1 years with the Cubs, where he was, I won't say elite, but like close to elite.
Right. And it's just, he's the power. Where's the power been since going to Coors Field? Really weird how that's just disappeared.
True, although the funny thing I remember about him is that he never was like a big exit velocity guy. So he wasn't a bad one. Like he's not Nicky Lopez, but he also never was like at the top of the pops where he was like just hitting the ball really hard. It always seemed like more he was a smart hitter, like good approach, like a gap hitter, certainly had over the fence power, but I think I'm more surprised at the average. Like I really thought going to Coors was going to make him into like an elite average hitter, and it didn't really do that either.
No, it sure didn't. And that's where it usually helps you a lot. But and last year he did hit for average despite the lack of power. In fact, you look at his numbers, you're like, oh, he slugged 475. That's not so bad. It's just the home run category that you're like, oh. And then the fact that he didn't hit one at all at Coors is a little concerning. But we'll see. The Rockies, they're getting Charlie Blackmon back on their from his bereavement leave. The Rockies, I always have a hard time figuring out what they're doing anyhow. They signed Bryant, but then traded away Arenado. there just wasn't that next step. Like I can't figure what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, Nolan Jones, he's not the greatest player in the world, but I thought he'd be up earlier. I was just kind of a little surprised that they just sent him down for 2 months. And yeah, at a different organization, it wouldn't matter. You'd look at him and go, oh, well, I see why he's blocked. But in Colorado, especially after Crone went on the IL, I thought, well, right away you'd see him. And I mean, he's up now, but yeah, it's a team I don't really like having too much investment in for that reason, unless it's a proven veteran, because that seems to be who they like. Where I don't like investing in Rockies because it's like I just don't trust them.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm kind of that same point, and it's fun to poke fun at them, but same time, yeah, we still have to use them as part of our player pool, and still I want to get them right, and that's really I'm always just a little off on some of these guys that are coming back. I didn't see Brenton
It's a
Doyle
great fan.
playing.
Well,
Go
I was
ahead.
gonna say too, it's a great fan base too. So like it's fun to poke fun at the team, but like they've got so many loyal fans. It's a great place to see a game. Like I just kind of feel for the fans there.
Oh, 100%. I mean, you see their attendance numbers are always good. I mean, the course field is beautiful. Unfortunately, I only got to kind of like peek in from the outside. So the only time I've been to Coors Field was around it. And it was during the COVID lockdown in 2020. We did there was one point where the numbers were down, right? So we did a road trip. We did like Zion. We did Denver. We walked around Coors Field. We peeked in through the gates, and that's all. We couldn't see any baseball, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've never been inside either. Like I been to Denver many years ago, but it was not during the baseball season, so I've never been in there either. But it looks beautiful from the outside for sure.
It does. It does indeed. Giancarlo Stanton coming off the IL, probably going to be limited to DH duty. He was out for 7 weeks with this strained left hamstring, which unfortunately is something we've seen before with him, that he's had these long absences due to muscle injuries. Big weekend against the Dodgers coming in, and he's from there. He really wanted to get back in time for this series. Didn't have much of a rehab assignment.
Yeah, so I saw him. I was there Tuesday for the little rehab that he had. I was in Somerset, New Jersey, which is the Yankees AA, and I saw him and Josh Donaldson and Tommy Conley. And that doesn't tell you much. Like those guys, especially Donaldson, you could see in his body language, he just didn't want to be there. I'm not saying that Donaldson. I think a lot of players are like, yeah, I just want to stay healthy. I'm getting my reps in. I'm not here to go 4 for 4 or whatever. But yeah, Stanton's back, and he's certainly useful when he's healthy. Like we know he can go on a big streak. I think for the audience here that you have, Jeff, like NFBC, like 15-team mix with no drops. He's just kind of tough sometimes because I imagine a lot of people hung on to him. Mm-hmm. But yeah, how long is he gonna be healthy? Like when is he gonna get hurt again? I'm not saying he will, but if I had to place a bet on it, I'd say there's a chance.
Yep. I'd say it's plus. I'd say it's you wouldn't even be able to get plus money for him not going on, or I should say you wouldn't be able to get plus money saying he'll go on the DL again. It's likely he'll be on the IL again at some point in time. So yeah, we'll see. Man, such pure power when he gets on a roll. You really want that, capture that there too. It's the tricky part. And he qualifies at outfield this year. Won't play there, but he qualifies.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, the other thing too, you're right. When he connects, like, I don't know if there's a player or maybe there's like 1 or 2 other players that's as exciting when he actually connects with the ball. And you're like, I can't believe what I just watched. Ball goes out like 115, 116 miles an hour for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. All right. One other injury note. And this one, we're still waiting to see if there's a transaction that's going to happen with Justin Steele, who is going to be on our list as a breakout guy. Instead, we're going to talk about as an injury guy now. He left yesterday's start after 3 innings with a forearm issue. He's going to get an MRI today on that one there. Such a nice start to the season. Really hate seeing this.
Yeah, the weird thing about it, like I was watching the game and I was on Twitter, like a lot of Cubs fans noted he was shaking his arm like in the 3rd inning, but it almost seemed to be more of like I'm just uncomfortable, and I don't think he called for the trainer, but then yeah, like afterward, they took him out, he didn't come back, and it just sort of makes you wonder. I'm not blaming the Cubs, it just sort of makes you wonder if something was wrong, before that. Yeah.
Yeah, and he wasn't very good in his previous start against the Reds. And he was actually pretty good yesterday before getting hurt, though, against the Rays. I think he had 3 no-hit innings before he left the game. So, yeah, kind of a real bummer there because he was a breakout guy. We'll use that as kind of our bridge to real or something to kind of sell high on here. Justin Steele in his breakout. Were you buying on this? Was this a new level for him, or was this a hot streak?
I mean, it was probably a bit of both. First of all, I think Steele was better than like we thought he was coming into the season. Like he's a good pitcher. He's capable. He's very good at tearing ground balls. However, this level, and this is often what happens to these pitchers the first third of the season, I don't think this was necessarily sustainable. I don't want to say he's getting lucky, but there's definitely some like batted ball luck at play where he wasn't going to continue pitching at this level. And I think you pointed out like one of his last starts, and there was one before that, before the 3 no-hit innings, you'd kind of seen some slippage a little bit. And the thing with Steele is he lives and dies by the ground ball, and that's kind of what happened in those 2 games. And I'm kind of scrambling to see which 2 they were now. It was the it was the Reds, and then it was at Houston, which is certainly a tough opponent. As you've pointed out, not as tough as they seem to be sometimes based on where they're ranked. But
Right.
yeah, in those 2 games, like he didn't keep the ball on the ground, and I don't think he really has strong enough stuff to survive that. Unlike some pitchers where it's a pop out or even a deep fly ball.
Exactly. So, unfortunately, can't trade him now. We'll wait and see the results of the MRI. You're going to need to see him pitch a few times before we make any other actions involving him. So that's unfortunate. We're going to hit up the diamonds or cubic zirconia discussion in a second here. But first, quick note from our Blue Wire sponsors. All right. Thank you for your indulgence there. For those of you listening live, it's only a couple seconds. For those of you on podcasts, we appreciate you listening to the ads. Blue Wire hosts all of our podcasts, the RotoWire podcasts. We really do appreciate them there. Let's talk about some of these guys that are post 200 picks that are really busting out. Starting off, already seen questions in the comments about him. It's Josh Jung. Main event ADP was 214. All he's done so far is hit 295 with 12 homers, 37 RBI, snuck in a stolen base, and 40 runs. I mean, I think that's a part of the aspect of Jung that we didn't expect, were the runs and, of course, the high average. What's your take on Josh Jung?
Well, I like him a lot. So he was already a good hitter who made some like real like sustainable changes last year in the minors to improve his approach, ability to drive the ball. The question was, and perhaps is with him, health. And that was the thing. He never really had a full season. And there were questions about his durability. Like, could he keep it up? And was the health contributing to, him not performing as well? As you pointed out, and this is in my notes, like the lineup team context helps him a lot. On a weaker team, middle of the road or worse team, he wouldn't have those runs. I do think the power slips. He's not going to hit like 40 home runs. But, if you drafted him where, he went, 25 home runs and 260 average, that's a pretty realistic expectation at this point for Jung.
Absolutely. A couple of things in mind, too, that I like about him. K percentage last year was 38.2. Now, again, that was in just 26 games, 100 plate appearances. It's down to 28.3 this year. Gotta love that. The spike in the contact percentage, the exit velocity, the hard hit rate, all the barrels, all those are, really positive mentions if you look at his StatCast metrics. So you love seeing that as well. So that indicates to me that at least, he's hitting the ball really hard. The question is, will he continue to hit fly balls at a 41% rate? Will he hit line drive? He's hit a lot fewer a lot fewer ground balls, I should say. About the same amount of line drives, a little less, but he's really getting some elevation on that ball. Will that continue? And will he continue to hit for that sort of that hard hit rate?
I think the hard hit rate will be close. The home runs are tougher just because you're right. Like he shouldn't be hitting this many home runs. The one thing I'll say from having seen him, and it's not like I watch him every day, but when I've watched him play, it doesn't strike me like an Alex Bregman or Nolan Arenado situation where he's specifically selling out for power to like one part of the park. Like it just looks more organic. Like it just looks like he's found his power. And as a result, again, that's why I don't think, he's on pace for like 35 or 34 home runs or whatever it is. That's not going to keep up, but he should hit like another like 13 to 15. And again, where you drafted him, if you got him outside of the 200, and I think you brought this up because I got him in an auction league. It was a 15-team mix for like $3. Like I'm pretty happy with that.
Yeah, I had a debate with a co-owner and a score sheet team we manage. And it was Jung. I prevailed, and we kept Jung over Alec Boehm. Boehm was for a couple of weeks. It was looking pretty close. Now Boehm's hurt; he went on the IL today. So that's something with his hamstring injury we'll have to watch there a little bit. But yeah, let's suffice to say I'm pretty happy with my choice.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember who was, it was the end game. Some remember who was left, but and Brett Sayre, president of Baseball Prospectus, was the co-manager there. At that point, he was driving the actual auction piece, but I was kind of feeding him like who I didn't want, so it was a co-decision, probably 70% Brett. But yeah, again, I'm not unhappy with the choice.
Yeah. Brett is, by the way, a fantastic dynasty player. I'm in a score sheet league with Brett, and unfortunately we're in the same division. So like I won 100 games last year and I was 10 games out. I mean, it's like, come on.
I was in an honor league with him once, and he's part of the reason I left. It was just, he didn't do well the first year, but he built that team for year 2. And he just, because of his knowledge of dynasty, he just wanted it going away.
Yeah. So make sure to give Brett a follow on Twitter. Good player. He's also in Tout Wars in the mixed auction league as well. Which Tout league are you in this year? You used to be NL, but I know you're drafting like you were online this year. Last couple.
Yeah.
Years,
So
right?
I'm in the mixed draft currently, and actually I'm the defending champion of both that and Labor NL. This year I'm third in Tout Mixed, although it's a distant third from Seth Trackman, who is at the moment like wiping the floor with all of us. And in Labor NL, I'm bouncing between first and second with Doug Dennis of Baseball HQ. And Glenn Colton and Rick Wolf are right on our heels. That's a much more interesting race than Tout Mixed, but those are my two industry affiliations.
Yeah. And actually I misspoke. You also were in AL Tout. In fact, during the pandemic, we did a couple, one of the online auctions. You pioneered the strategy that Doug Dennis perfected last year of completely punting starting pitching, just loading up on the hitting categories, doing well in the ratios and saves. You did well with it. I think you finished third the year that you did it. And then Doug won it going away last year.
Yeah, I finished fourth, and it was like a 60-game season. So, like, who knows, like, what would have happened? I think the pitching was fine. The offense is where I might not have gotten to the promised land. I will say that's actually an old school, like Alex Patton strategy from the early 80s, like back when, in the American Dreams League, Peter Kreutzer, was one of the members of the Tout Board, is in that league too. That's an old school 4x4 strategy, like before the ratings requirements. And, Alex figured out that you can pretty much just spend everything or almost everything on offense, get one reliever on the cheap and then just get 8 other $1 relievers. And, one or two of them just wind up like, stumbling into saves, and you win that. You win ERA, you win WHIP, and then you cruise on offense. It's easier in 4x4, obviously. I know you're in an old school 4x4 league. I've heard you mention a few times. It's doable in 5x5, but the point you've made is the margin for error is pretty thin.
Yeah. And the thing is, we have no innings requirement there. And I think we've discussed that a couple of times on this pod and how that's controversial for some people. I still think you got to get everything right to make it work out. Doug did get everything right last year, or almost everything right. He got Aaron Judge at a $30 discount, first of all. That tends to help. And then, a couple other of those bats he also did. So the fact is, even though other people spent close to the same amount of money on hitting as he did, he won the hitting categories going away, which was pretty impressive. But at any rate, I thought, though, when you're giving up 2 categories, not one, wins and strikeouts, it's really tough to pull off.
Yeah, and the other way you need everything to go right, too, is you need the teams behind you to all kind of be very good but not excellent. And that's the problem, I think, even more than nailing the strategy, which is if you do that strategy to perfection, and you finish with, 98 points, somebody could still finish with 100, 103 or whatever, and you come a close second. And I think when I analyzed it, it's almost a coin flip as to whether that will happen or not. So, yeah, it's an interesting strategy. I think it's a good strategy to ensure you're competitive. As far as winning, maybe not so much.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's a margin for her. But you know what? It's 1 out of 12 anyhow. That's your chances of winning a league in the first place. So, I feel like, all right, you give yourself a chance to be competitive and maybe you'll win. So I kind of like it that way. Some chatter in the room about Spencer Steer. Hit the go-ahead homer last night, batting fourth a lot. He's not at the same level as Jung in terms of his production for the season, but he's hitting 289 with 8 homers, 28 RBI, and 30 runs. He was part of the prospect haul last year in the Reds. They got that in the Tyler Mahle trade and Christian Encarnacion Strand in that same trade. Steer, I mean, he's kind of a little fly in the ointment that the Reds were kind of like, okay, we'll give him the job now. He's ready now, but our big names are coming up later. He's at a point now where, like, okay, we have to find a way to keep him in the lineup and get all of our other big time prospects.
Yeah, and I think you're at the point now, like you're right, like he's not like great or he's not, certainly isn't somebody who should keep like Strata Encarnacion or anyone else down, but he's earned a spot, and I have to think even when Joey Votto comes back, and you probably know more about that potential timetable than I do, he's got to play somewhere. Like I almost feel more what's going to happen is somebody in the outfield is going to wind up taking a seat or at DH, and they're just going to keep Steer in there. Like they have to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. Maybe put Steer in the outfield because he's got a better arm than India. Jonathan India is kind of another fly in the ointment because he's not a great defensive second baseman, but where else do you put him? Because you got to keep him in. I don't think they're going to trade him because I think that they're already dealing with some kind of backlash on that. And India's playing well in his own right offensively. So I don't think they'll part with India, but they do have to figure out where all these pieces fit eventually. And they've got more coming up in the future next year, like Marte, like Cam Collier, some others too.
Yeah, it's a nice problem to have if you're a Reds fan. Like it's great. And it's another city that I felt bad like seeing what's happened there with the Reds. Like I hope they're competitive again. And I hope they find the pitching, but it's really more, I hope Nick Lodolo is healthy and Hunter Green finds consistency because they already have some of the pieces. Unlike some teams where you're like, gee, where are they going to find the pitching? I think the Reds have it. It's just a matter of unlocking that potential.
Yeah, and I hope Andrew Abbott's for real. Take their time calling him up because I think there is I've seen a lot of pitchers initially dominate when they hit AAA and then they kind of hit a little bit of a lull. I want them to power through that lull a little bit there too. But yeah, I do love seeing all this talent. It's fun to see all this talent, especially after how bitter I felt going into last season, right after the lockout, when they peeled off all these players. To see the turnarounds happen so quickly is kind of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wish you luck. I'm a long-suffering Mets fan, so I know in the lean years you just kind of get bitter and grit your teeth, but it's hard to go away. It's hard to stop rooting for your team.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about your Mets. Big series right now with the Phillies. They won again last night. Carrasco pitched well. He's pitched well his last two times out. Not dominant necessarily, but he hasn't been getting hit hard either. He's at least average starting pitcher, which is something they struggled to get for a while.
Yeah, that's really all they need from him at this point, especially with Max and Verlander in the fold. They just need him to be kind of and even Kodai Senga, if he's as good as he's been, like his last three starts against the Rays and the Phillies, they just need him to be like a solid 4, go out there, give him 5 or 6 decent innings. And if he can do that, I think he'll be okay. My concern with Carrasco, I think now is just the age, like the durability. It just has a lot of miles on him. He's been hurt over the years, but he's just reaching that age where it wouldn't surprise me if he, got hurt or had to just sit a couple starts. So the ceiling with him kind of is what it is.
For sure. Absolutely. So, they're trying to work in their young players and figure out where all their pieces fit. Vientos only plays against lefties for the most part, and he doesn't play a position. So I've been finding it difficult to roster him. I have him in the RotoWire staff keeper league, and I haven't activated him because he's just not playing enough.
Yeah, the problem with Vientos, and there's the eligibility problem too in most leagues where he still is a UT or DH only. But the Mets have a roster problem in that they have 2 DHs essentially. So on some teams, if you didn't have that, it's like, okay, well, we don't have a DH. We'll just play him there a lot. They have Dan Vogelbach, and I know Vogelbach's having a down year, but the issue more is that it just their roster has so much limited flexibility because they have both those guys. And you're right, Vientos really can't play third, and Brett Beatty's there, so that's irrelevant anyway. And first base is blocked by a guy who is pretty good. So there just isn't a place for Vientos. As much as I like him as a hitter, we just haven't seen. I know he had a sac fly today, but we just haven't seen much from him. I think it's partially because when you're a young guy, we saw this with Francisco Alvarez at the very beginning. It's tough. People tell us all the time, like if you're a veteran and you've been around a long time, maybe you get used to being a sub. Some of those guys don't even do that. But for young players, that's a very hard thing to get acclimated to.
Absolutely, absolutely. Being on the wrong side of a platoon, especially like that, is really difficult there. So yeah, yeah, we'll see how they figure things out. But I feel like they're on the cusp of going on a run, and meanwhile the Braves are vulnerable. So no, it could be a very interesting race. Kind of a reverse of previous years where the Braves kind of made up the stagger. This year might be the Mets making up the stagger on them.
Yeah, although I still think Atlanta's the favorite until I see otherwise. Like they're
Sure.
another team that even though they're stumbling now, it's not difficult to see them putting it all together.
Yeah. They just got to get one. They need one more pitcher, I think. One more starting pitcher. I think that, going with 3 reliable starters is tough. If they can get Schuster a little bit better or Soroka looks a little bit better, then I think they're in really good shape. So we'll see about that one there. Let's continue with our Diamonds are Cubic Zirconia list on hitters. Nolan Gorman, pick 399 in terms of ADP. In other words, rare, not often drafted in the main event. So far, he's, according to RotoWire's earned auction value dollar tool, he's worth $24 in a 15-team 5x5 league. 13 homers, 41 RBI, 4 stolen bases, 22 runs, and now he's hitting 272. Are you buying into his renaissance?
Yes, I definitely am. So Nolan Gorman, Robert Orr, I mentioned before, had a great piece on him at Baseball Prospectus last month. And what he
Mm-hmm.
talked about was Gorman's struggle with the high fastball. So he
Mm-hmm.
just couldn't catch up to it. And it's something that, it's not limited to Gorman. A lot of hitters have trouble with that pitch. And he's swinging less at those pitches this year. But what he's really done is he's made a swing adjustment and a stance adjustment where he's in less of a crouch. And if you go find the article, that Robert O wrote, his hands are higher, so he's getting to the ball more quickly. And when he connects, he's generating more power. Yes, the pitchers will adjust; they always do. But the bust he was last year is gone. Like Gorman's legit. He'll have some average struggles here and there, and go through some streaks, but the power is real.
Yeah, I think so too. Common thread here is too, like they made their debuts last year. They struggled a little bit. And in year 2, they're a little bit of, it's not quite post hype, but it is a little bit of post hype. I think with Gorman, it is. The NFBC is rolling out second chance drafts. Basically, I think the stats start accumulating next Monday. And Jung went at a pick 100, Gorman at pick 94. So that's only 4 leagues so far, but at least in these cases, the drafters think they're for real.
Yeah, I mean, that might be a little aggressive. And, I think I heard you talking about this with Fred Zinke in that podcast. Fred was talking about like kind of the recency bias. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, I'm sorry, it wasn't you and Fred. It was, this is where I get my podcast picks up. It was Eno Saris and Derek Van Riper on the Athletic podcast.
Okay.
But they were talking about the same concept. They were talking about, we have recency bias, we really can't help ourselves. However, with Gorman in particular, maybe that's a little overvalued. I don't think it's particularly crazy. Like we talked about coming into the season, how second base was kind of thin at the top and kind of thick at the bottom. There aren't many second basemen that Gorman at the moment, I'd say, is definitively worse than. Like he probably is like a top 6, 7 second baseman.
Yeah, and it speaks to the position too, right? That it's really been a case where we haven't had too many solid second basemen. Jazz Chisholm obviously qualifies there, but isn't a full-time second baseman, and he's hurt. Would you rather draft Jazz Chisholm for what's left of the season, or Nolan Gorman for what's left of the season?
I still think I'd rather have Jazz. I know there's some risk because he's coming back from an injury, but particularly in a roto format, those steals, and yeah, I know more people are running, but the potential for those steals makes it really difficult to pass up on him. I know there's some average risk, but it's not like Gorman's a high average guy either. So it's closer than it was before the season started, but I think I'd still rather have Jazz.
Yeah, this list of the second chance ADPs is fascinating to me. I'm just looking and sorting by second base. Semion's first, no surprise there. Well, actually, it is a slight surprise because there's the guy that now qualifies at second that's going after Semien, and that's Mookie Betts.
Yeah, I have Betts on a team. It's the same team with Jung, and I forgot for a second he was like middle infield eligible. And I asked Brett like, why is this other player on our bench? And he's like, oh, it's because we have Mookie Betts in middle infield now. I'm like, oh yeah, that'll do it. Like that definitely. Yeah, and Betts is funny because he's one of those players. I know the speed has dropped off with him, but every year he's just so like good and like kind of top of the pops, and he's not quite a full five category guy because he's not running nearly as much, but he's still elite. So I could see a case for Betts over Semien, particularly because in a five outfielder league, having that flexibility to go back and forth with Betts between outfield and middle infield is big.
Indeed, it really is. It's huge, especially like, yeah, you get basically you get 7 slots that you can do, 8 if you count UT. So 8 spots that you can use them in. That's huge. That's massive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But so Semien, Betts, Altuve's third. Nico Horner is the 4th second baseman on average drafted here. Ozzie Albies, who hit his 11th homer yesterday, is 5th, and then Jazz, and then Gorman. So a meteoric rise for Gorman at the second base spot.
Yeah, it's funny. Not even looking at the second chance ADP. I just kind of made an educated guess that Gorman was 6th or 7th, and that sounds like it's where he is about.
All right.
Yeah.
This guy is definitely a post type sleeper. Josh Lowe, drafted at 386 on average. Man, what a great year he's having so far. I know Vlad Sedler, our good friend, was on Josh Lowe. Not too many others were. 304, 11 homers, 13 stolen bases, 37 RBI and 28 runs. You might lose a little bit in like runs and RBI because of the raise factor and platooning, but he's been so good that you can't even platoon him right now.
Yeah, so the thing about Lowe is I was in on him last year, and I have to admit I was mostly out. I did get him in an AL only. It was almost a bodies thing as opposed to really wanting Josh Lowe. But it is a classic case where the Rays are maximizing his ability by starting him like much more against righties. I know he's played a little bit against lefties, and it's working. And it's a weird profile because the strikeouts have dropped, but he's still swinging a lot. He's swinging a lot more than he did last year. So I feel like it's a case where he's exhibiting less patience, but the bat to ball ability of his is shining through as a result. Like sometimes we see that with players where they're too passive. They've got the bat on their shoulder and then they fall behind in the count. I think Lowe is just being more aggressive, and the talent there is helping him. The power, I think, is going to regress. He's actually not hitting the ball as that much harder than he was last year, but he's going to run. The other note about him is he kind of falls into that Rays bucket where he doesn't hit quite as well at the top. His OPS there is under 800. In a 15-teamer, I don't think that really matters. And in a 12-teamer shallower, it's just something to keep in mind if you're playing lineups.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to be able to use a guy in his home park. It's that's really tough to try to avoid that. And that's why, like, Rockies pitchers, obviously Coors always wins, but part of the thing is you can't even do like the road starts thing. I know Gene McCaffrey has always been big about finding home pitchers you can use in their home parks to begin with there. But it is a kind of a hidden factor there. 2 other hitters real quick before we hit to some breakout pitchers: Yandy Diaz and Jorge Soler. Diaz at 262, Soler at 288. Soler, I mean, let's face it, the power has always been there. No surprise there. That home run in the World Series is still traveling, but still nice to see him healthy and producing.
Yeah, so I think the pandemic did a number on all of us. I know it did on me because I forgot that the 48 home runs he hit was 4 years ago. It seems like it was much longer. And yeah, I know it was happy fun ball that year, but he's one of those players. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Carlos Quentin way back when Quentin, the rare times he was healthy. The home run Soler hits are home runs anywhere. Like they're not cheapies. So as a result, if he stays, the average is going to fall off. He's streaky. He should hit 35 to 40 homers. The rub with him, he's almost always hurt or he struggles. He had a back issues in April. I know we don't like back issues, and that's the thing that makes me nervous about Soler. I hope he doesn't, go into a streak or struggle and suddenly the back is ailing and, it goes from being out a week to being out a month. That's probably my big concern with him. He's a power hitter, so back issues with a power hitter really kind of make me wary. The one note too about him, he has an opt-out in his contract. I'm pretty sure if he is healthy the rest of the way or most ways, he's going to use it.
Yeah. So that might encourage the Marlins to make a trade if it gets to that. Although the Marlins are taking advantage of the slow start by the Phillies. They're still, in contention for a playoff spot, maybe less inclined to make any sort of trade. Although they just got smoked by the Padres today, 10-1. That's the thing about the Marlins. They either lose by 8 or they win by 1.
Yeah, their run differential isn't very good, but yeah, I think coming into today, they, if the playoffs ended today, I know it's silly, it's June 1st, but they were in one of the wild card positions.
Yeah, exactly. Joe Musgrove finally had a good start. And the last two starts actually have been pretty good. 145 ERA in his last two starts. So maybe some signs of things turning around for the Padres. They started today 25-30, same as the Phillies.
Yeah, I mean, I always laugh because they had the bad mojo of or the Padres did of doing the crying Jordan on Clayton Kershaw after they beat him like a
Yep.
couple weeks ago or a few weeks ago, and since then they were terrible. I know one doesn't really have anything to do with the other, but I found that kind of funny.
Yeah, absolutely. Instant karma. Yeah, Dodgers fans love to see that. That was for sure. Catch a lot of that out here. Before we move over to the pitchers, quick note from our friends at Rival Fantasy. A new MLB season means it's time for a new kind of daily fantasy baseball. Rival Fantasy is the fantasy platform reinventing the way daily and weekly games are played, and they brought new games to the ballpark this year that fantasy players won't find anywhere else. Rival Fantasy games include Fantasy Bingo, head-to-head player challenges, and Fantasy Book, where users can select over-unders for 2 to 5 players. With games like this, daily fantasy has never been better. Right now, RotoWire listeners can get a $50 protected first play. That means if you win your first play, you keep your winnings. But if you lose your entry, Rival Fantasy will fully refund you up to $50. Go to play.rivalfantasy.com/signup and use code RotoWireMLB at signup and deposit a minimum of $25 to get your first entry on Rival protected up to $50. Now's the time to step up to the plate and become a Rival today. Welcome to the arena. All right, Jeff Erickson here with Mike Gianella from Baseball Prospectus. You can follow Mike on Twitter at Mike Gianella. And it is right. Yeah, it is. Okay, I just want to make sure. Sometimes I say that and then I look again. It's like, oh, he has a different handle. But no, it is at Mike Gianella. And of course, check him out at Baseball Prospectus. We're looking at players that are breakout guys post 200. Are they for real? What sort of value can we place on them compared to their peers? Mitch Keller. Incredible season so far. But he was drafted at pick 273 in the main event. Man, you're loving what you got out of him, especially in terms of strikeouts.
Yeah, I'm a little sad because I think with the exception of one of these pitchers on your rundown, I don't have them anywhere. But yeah, so the strikeouts are really what jumped out with him. So he's throwing 3 different types of fastballs, at least according to the numbers that are out there. And it's the cutter he's added that really seems to have made a difference. Now, Baseball Prospectus, we have our own like ERA estimator. It's called DRA, which is deserved run average. It's a little bit higher than the other, the expected ERA I see, but it's still a 3.43, which is really good. And the other thing about Keller, even if the ERA jumps, I think the strikeout jump holds. So he's a definite, ADP jumper in those second chance drafts, and somebody who I think most of this is real.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that. I worry about the team context. Pirates had a really bad month of May, although they finished with a decent road trip. But that might be tricky. But yeah, Keller's really skyrocketed in the ADP. He's at 84 overall. He's pitcher 41, but that includes relievers and starters. He's in the same territory as Bryce Miller, Pablo Lopez, Hunter Green, Joe Musgrove, who got a good start today, and ahead of Shane Bieber, who got smacked around pretty good yesterday, and overall his strikeouts are down.
So wait, that sounds like pitchers are going a lot higher. And I know they always go high at NFBC, but it sounds like they're going even higher than they did at the beginning of the season, at least in the non-main event leagues.
I think you're right, and I think the reason for that is that so many pitchers have gone bad. The milk's gone bad on them, so it's taken away guys that we normally would have included in that and felt like, okay, there's just not enough guys out there I can get, right? Alek Manoah, I can't use him anymore. Lance Lynn, can't use him anymore. Spent way too much bandwidth talking about those two jokers.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, I have both of them in my long-standing local league, and they've killed me.
Yeah, Manoah in particular, I have in too many places. Lance Lynn, I traded him in AL Tout Wars this week to Larry Schechter. And he actually initiated the conversation. I wasn't even peddling him, but so I've got that at least going for me, that I got Akil Baddoo. But the fact is, I settled for Akil Baddoo because he's playing the next 2 weeks against a bunch of righties. So I'm excited about just getting some playing time. I mean, that's where I am with Lance Lynn.
How are you doing there? Are you where are you overall?
There's only 12 teams, so I can't be 13th.
Okay. Well, I mean, so when you're in that position, like Frank Stanfield in labor was at the bottom, and I'm not calling out Frank, is actually of CBS Sports. He's a good guy, but
Hmm.
he made a trade where, he got Matt Mervis like right as Matt Mervis was getting called up. And I think some people from the outside might have thought he gave up too much, but sometimes when you're in that position, you just have to kind of, make those like deep bombs and hope they get caught. Usually the Hail Mary is an incomplete pass, but there's
Right.
no glory in finishing 12th. So you just have to kind of take those risks. So
Yeah.
just something I think from the outside might not make sense, but all politics are local, as you like to say.
Exactly. Exactly. And the thing is, too, and Frank's a two-time defending champ of the Tout Wars head-to-head league, so obviously he knows
Yeah,
how
he
to
knows what
play.
he's doing.
Yeah. It's yeah. When you get in a tough spot, you got to figure out, okay, do I wait? Do I wait for these guys to come around, or is it time for more drastic measures? And I think you always have to make that decision. And in that case, it sounded like he needed to do more of a drastic measure. I kind of made one too, and I actually had gotten 3 good starts in a row out of Lynn, so I was kind of happy. It's like selling a boat. I was happy to get it off my hands, and the timing worked out well.
Yeah, no, I mean, you've been in a position with pitchers like, yeah, I get it. They're probably get better, but like if I don't get something for them, and like you said, the milk goes completely bad, and I've just got to throw it out, then I got nothing. And I know it's psychological, but we've all done it.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you're wrong about that too. But I was talking with Rick and Glenn on their show on Sirius XM. They had me on the other day, and one of the things that came up is like, when do you make that decision? Like, I cut Jake McCarthy in the NFBC when he got sent down, like a week after he got sent down. I just couldn't wait. They picked him up this past week, and it's a mistake maybe I made, but you can't be afraid to make mistakes either. You got to keep, sometimes there's the opportunity cost of getting a good starter otherwise, or getting a good player that you just, because I was holding on to this other play. Well, you can't lose by inaction either.
Well, that's the other thing about an FBC. And like when I started playing like initially with TGFBI, I kind of learned that the hard way. Like you can't sit on 2 or 3 players on reserve for very long. Like it just
No, it's
there's so
tough.
much opportunity cost. Like you wind up putting a bad starting pitcher into your lineup. You wind up putting a platoon hitter or a Rocky on the road or whatever it is. You need a bench. And, yes, you can hold on to one player, and there are some no brainers. I completely see why you dropped McCarthy. Like it just didn't really make sense in that format to hold on to him.
Yeah. And the thing is, you'll make mistakes and your competitors will make mistakes too. But if sometimes that action is better than, I think usually on average, you're doing better by acting than by remaining static there. So that's the way it's always worked out for me in the past.
Yeah, I used to like, so being like a tout person and like a deep league person with unlimited reserves, I used to hate those rules. Like of
Hmm.
no IL and a limited bench. I really like it now. Like I find it challenging. Like I like the idea, like you said, that everybody's going to make mistakes, and it's just one of those things where you have to kind of decide, like, okay, if I drop this guy and someone picks him up, like, can I live with it? Like it's kind of fun.
Yep. It is. It is. And I like that I have different types of leagues too. All these things I like. Let's continue with our diamond or cubic zirconia list. Tyler Wells mentioned in the chat as well. He was barely even drafted, pick 481 on average. You've gotten quite a run out of Tyler Wells so far. If you've rostered him, maybe if you even picked him up, 61 Ks in 63 innings, which is well above his K rate from the past. 0.825 ERA. I mean, he does give up some hard contact from time to time. Of the pitchers on this list, I think his status is probably the shakiest. But what's your take on Tyler Wells?
Yeah, you're probably right. There's one other name that might be close, but that's just because of the team context. In terms of the player, you're absolutely right. When you break down the numbers, he looks to me more like a home streamer than anything else, thanks to the park. And, in my notes, I said, don't tell Shane Bieber not to pile on him because, Bieber got hit there anyway. But
Yep.
even so, it just feels like regression's coming. So Wells does generate a lot of weak contact. But even so, like all the batted ball data looks a lot like last year's batted ball data. I
Mm-hmm.
think he's more of a 4 ERA guy going forward, and I think more of a deep mix play. And in anything shallower than that, like kind of a streamer, you start him at home, you move him in and out in a 10 or 12 team league because I think he'll still be out there, or should be out there on reserve. The BABIPs with him, I know we look at BABIP less than we used to, but they're so low. Like it just seems like impossible that it's going to stay that way.
Yeah, I think so too. Speaking of tout wars in that team, I do have Tyler Wells, but I also had Grayson Rodriguez, unfortunately. Is Grayson Rodriguez a cut now that he's been sent back down?
I mean, and anything but only yes. Like the tout is only, so I think you kind of have to hang on to him there. I don't know who else you'd pick up. Maybe you know something I don't about your league, but even in a 15-team mix, I think at this point you have to drop him. He could be back in 2 or 3 starts, but there's still no guarantee that he's going to be good. Like we just don't know, and that's a tough thing with rookie pitchers. I think eventually he'll be good. Like there's too much talent there. And a lot of his struggles, like something else I picked up today from listening to Derek and Van Riper and Eno, is he's kind of throwing the cutter at inopportune times, and he's got to kind of work on that. But I don't want him working on that while he's on my team. I think I'll just cut my losses and go after him next year.
That sounds about right. You see that a lot of times. A guy gets sent down, figures it out, or figures that out in the bigs eventually. But yeah. Post hype sleepers work for pitchers as well as hitters too. So I think that's the route to take as well. Let's look at.
I think it's even.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say I think it's even tougher with pitchers than hitters, just because a hitter goes 0 for 20 and it hurts, but if a pitcher puts up like a 7 ERA with a bad whip, it just can destroy your team.
Indeed it can. Marcus Stroman on Memorial Day pitched a 1-hit complete game shutout. The 1 hit wasn't even that hard of contact. Wander Franco had a little flare out to left field. Stroman's pitching very well. He was picked 250, so it wasn't like he was completely out of the blue, but he's definitely overachieved even that though still. And he's interesting because he could be a free agent at the end of the year. Says he doesn't want to get traded by the Cubs, but a trade could still happen.
Yeah, it could. So the thing with him, part of the key to his success is his sliders has historically been his best pitch. And I mentioned Mike Ahedo of BP before, who wrote about this last year. He said, "Hey, Marcus, you should throw your slider more." Well, he's doing that. I don't know if Marcus reads, what Mike has to write, but that's helped him. And the other thing, if you look at the heat maps, like he is throwing the ball lower, or I don't know if he's generating more sink, or he's just starting with a lower release point. But last year in the heat maps, there was more in the middle of the zone. This year, there's a little bit like kind of middle low, but it's almost all low. That's why he's keeping the ball on the ground. It's always a fine line. I don't overstate this, but I could see him with a mid-3, and he's still going to have a low K rate. So that's always like kind of something to watch with Stroman. I don't know what the Cubs are going to do. Like, it's really weird because I know Stroman's mate has said he wants to come back, and he seems like a player that they should sign. Like, we know they have the money. We know despite the results this year, they want to compete, but I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I actually expected better things from them this year too. I thought they'd be, quietly, I thought they'd be better than the Brewers. I thought the Cardinals, but I also thought the Cardinals would run away with the division, and that obviously isn't happening either. So I've just been wrong about the division a lot, I guess. But yeah, I think, and it seems like Stroman has felt very comfortable there, and you can't have. I think that's kind of an important thing sometimes too. Being able, we see like what he's doing with his pitches, but being able to like help be able to figure that out in Chicago has seemingly worked for him. So that's another thing I'm kind of like, you don't want to necessarily see him change that venue because it might not be better elsewhere.
Yeah, we've seen that with pitchers who get traded at the deadline. Like sometimes it works, and then sometimes new pitching coach, new catcher, and all of a sudden, and I think more so for someone who isn't a high velocity pitcher, that's where it goes sideways. Like if somebody's throwing like 96, 97 and they move, it's like, okay, well, yeah, they have to get used to a new catcher, but it's not the same as if you're throwing like 92, 93, you're working with movement, you need a good framer, and yeah, then it can be difficult.
Yeah, I think so too. If you think you should be selling high on Stroman, what can you ask for?
You mean for fantasy or the Cubs?
Well, let's start fantasy. And then maybe we can look at the Cubs too.
Well, fantasy, I would probably try to look for somebody maybe like outside the top 100, but maybe not too far for a hitter, just see if somebody looks at that ERA, looks at the results. What's a little bit tough about the sell high is that the strikeouts are low. Somebody might come back and say, hey, I get it, he's performing well, but I'd rather get a pitcher with closer to a strikeout an inning or even better than that if I'm going to trade for a pitcher. But it doesn't hurt to start there, right? Because really, you always ask if somebody shoots you down, you can say, well, you know what, I tried.
Yeah. It's funny is, and probably this is because he doesn't get a ton of strikeouts. Stroman is on average going at like pick 174 in the second chance draft. So not too far from his main event ADP, at least comparison to the other risers that we've seen. He's definitely earlier, but not like considerably so.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is roster construction. Like I feel that for your first 3 starters, you do want to try to get those strikeouts and have that locked in. It's funny on my talent team. I mean, it's not haha funny, but I got Justin Verlander, Max Fried, and Robbie Ray. Those are my front 3 in Tout Wars. And the pitching's done okay because I have Stroman and Chris Bassett. They were my next 2 pitchers. But strikeouts are where I'm struggling, and that's why, because I was trying to get those strikeouts on the front end, and it didn't really work out.
And they're still in 3rd place, so pretty good.
Yeah, I mean the problem there is Mullins is hurt now. Cedric Mullins is hurt for me too, so I'm struggling in steals and strikeouts. And as you pointed out, I didn't do it deliberately like Doug Dennis did. It's difficult to play an 8-category game, even if you fall into it like I did by mistake.
Absolutely. Because you're not dominating. You're doing well in the hitting, but you're not dominating it. So yeah, that's right. The tricky part there. Absolutely. Got another pitcher on our list, and that is I think it was undrafted. Now, nary a single NFBC main event draft was he taken. That's Bryce Elder for the Braves. And Elder, I mean, he was not the highest touted young guy. I mean, Schuster was touted higher. Dylan Dodds was touted higher. Elder, all he's done so far in 11 starts is post a 1.92 ERA, a 1.157 WHIP, and 56 Ks in 65 innings. Only 3 wins to show for all that, but keep in mind he wasn't on the big league roster to start the season.
So of all the names that you gave me, this is the one I know he's doing well, but I don't trust it at all. Like I'm just really feel skeptical. If I had him, I certainly would, obviously hang on to him and not just give him away in trade. But if someone came to me wanting to trade by Bryce Elder, I'd probably be like, yeah, you should go to somebody else. Like you're not going to get what you're looking for. He is generating a lot of ground balls, and he's kind of a death by slider pitcher where he's just throwing a ton of sliders. But the weird thing is the hard hit data is still really high, and even higher than it was last year. And then the other thing too is, I don't think it's definite, but if he struggles at all, you just mentioned it, Atlanta has some other options and they're competing. So it wouldn't surprise me, if Elder has, a couple bad starts or goes on a bad run, if there's a quick hook for him. So those are my concerns. Like I get it. He's done really well, but if you can't sell high on him, I would do it.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it might be harder to do, like you said, because the name value wasn't there in the first place. You're not even a veteran, so it's not even like Stroman where you have a little name recognition. But funny thing is, Bryce Elder has been involved in a ton of trades. I pulled up the Yahoo page, and they have a good trades involving this player that have been made, and there's some interesting ones there. And I don't know about how the contract situations worked out, but there's 25 trades involving Bryce Elder so far today alone. And Spencer Steer, guy we talked about earlier, is one of them in a straight up trade. David Robertson's been dealt straight up. Francisco Lindor, that's crazy right there. I mean, that I know that he's been struggling, but come on, this is that to me is wild to see that sort of return. Now I don't know if there's some salaries involved in that in the keeper format or something, but that's just crazy.
I have to say that has to be a keeper thing because I can't imagine otherwise. Yeah, Lindor's struggled. I mean, he's picked it up a little bit lately, although some of that was the core series. But yeah, I if you make that trade straight up in a redraft, you're a genius.
Yep, I saw a Bryce for Bryce rookie trade, Elder for Miller. I'd rather have Miller than Elder, even though Miller just got crushed by the Yankees this week. But still, I think I'd take Bryce Miller over Bryce Elder.
Yeah, I think I would too. Although, yeah, Miller's got some regression coming, but the difference there is I believe a lot more in Miller.
Yeah, I'm in the same way. I mean, the Braves really need Elder. They're in a position where if he fails, I mean, then they're really relying on making some sort of deal because Soroka might be a little shaky. Schuster had 1 strikeout against the A's yesterday. He did get the win, but he was dodging raindrops the whole start. They're really and even Charlie Morton as your number 2 is a little shaky.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Like it is easy for me to say that he's going to regress or they'll pull him, but you're absolutely right. Like unless they, find another way or unless, he just got promoted, AJ, Smith-Shawver, winds up in the rotation, which is not a certainty. Like we've seen the Spencer Strider comparisons, but
Yeah.
I don't think you can say he's going to be the next Spencer Strider. Like there's only one, pitcher like that.
Exactly. And I think I might have even made the comparison a little bit just because start him off in the bullpen and move him to the rotation. Yeah, it's the old Larry Dierker, Whitey, Earl Weaver sort of way of bringing pitchers along. But just because they're doing it doesn't make them the same.
Yeah, the Rays did it with David Price like way back when, I remember. But you're right. Like it's not always a successful formula, and some pitchers like really struggle with that. Like they don't like being in the bullpen after spending all their time in the minors in the rotation.
Right, exactly. So I think good luck. And I guess there is a market out there for Bryce Elder. I just didn't think it was that robust. Maybe I'm wrong, but maybe we're playing in different types of leagues, Mike, and viva la difference again.
Yeah, I mean, leagues like that are kind of fun when there's a lot of trading. Like I get that we're all looking for an edge in the industry league, so we don't trade very much. But I do miss leagues like way back when, where you just pick up the phone and and I say phone and make a deal with somebody within like half an hour.
Yeah, well, Ian Kahn still does that. He calls me all the time in XFL. If you haven't been on the other end of an Ian Kahn phone call, but you just play in one league with him and you will. It is a more efficient way of getting trades done. I like it. And plus you get to talk to somebody. It's keeping in touch with your friends.
Yeah, there's a couple people I still do that with in my home league, and it is nice. It's a nice just to shoot the breeze for a few minutes. Even if you don't make a trade, it's just nice to shoot the breeze and talk baseball. That rehab game I went to with Stanton and Donaldson, that I went with a league mate, and we didn't even talk trade. Nice. It was just nice, sitting there with him in the nice weather, northeast weather for a couple hours, and in the as the sun was going down, and talking baseball.
Talking ball, catching up with the families, all that kind of good stuff. My original league, it's like we started when we were in college. Now our kids are going to college. It's kind of crazy. And so
my league is, I mean, it's Billy Allman, named after the baseball player Brown graduate, because it was originally Brown University. And I did not go to Brown, and I joined that league about 10 years in, like in the mid 90s. So that's how long I've been in it. That's how old I am. I was a young pup when I started. And like the people in there now, like, their kids, they have little kids, their kids are grown, like they're out of the house. It's just wild, like, watching people like grow up in those leagues over the years.
Yeah, it is. It's really cool. I love holding on to long traditions like that. Have a golf trip like that, have this league, have a golf league that's over 20 years. It's pretty cool. I like it. So, hey, what do you got cooking up at BP next? What's your next feature coming up?
Well, I do a FAAB column every week. I mentioned that it's actually a retrospective FAAB, so I cover TGFBI and what went on there, as well as Tout Ale and Labor NL. Today I publish every Thursday, like kind of a freelance column. Today I was looking at like small samples in April versus small samples in May. Like, why do we pay attention more to the April samples over the May samples? I haven't decided what we're going to write about next week, but I was thinking about writing about 2 start pitchers, kind of when they're good, when they're bad. I know the conventional wisdom is kind of almost always to go with a 2-start arm. I've been skeptical of that over the years. I just need to pull together some research to kind of really dig into it if I do decide to go that route. And then we have our podcast, Flags Fly Forever. It was on hiatus last year, but we're back. That's me, John Hagelin, who is also a good player in his own right. He won TGFBI the first year, was at the Champions League. I think he was in Tout for a couple of years. And then our producer, Samuel Hale, who's a radio guy from Texas. So we have that going. We're actually recording tonight. We went once a week in the preseason. We're kind of doing every 2 weeks or so during the season.
Awesome. So Flags Fly Forever. Make sure to check that out. Download it, get it, or flat, and mark it too, so you can get a notification when it comes up there. We'll hit up a couple of questions before we go. Heart Foundation says need some help with Mullins going down and/or starting pitching help with Steele going down. Should I go with Ha-Seong Kim or Jack Sawinski or Leody Taveras, Siri, and then for Bailey Ober for Steele? Let's talk about the hitting guys there. Ha-Seong Kim, Jack Sawinski, Leody Taveras, or Jose Siri. Who do you like best among that group?
Well, I mean, some of that depends on what you need in terms of steals or power, but I think I like Sawinski. Like, I get that he's streaky, but he offers a little bit of both. It sounds like that's a deep enough situation where you're not really worried about the lineup. You're just more worried about overall production. So I think I'd take my chance with Sawinski. Hope you get into another hot streak. And, if you don't, then looking at those other names, it sounds like you might be able to find somebody else on the wire.
Yeah, I agree. Saw some people chatting up Ben Lively. Had a gem against the Red Sox, and he's been pitching well since calling up. Shut out the Mets in his first call up. AAA numbers are actually pretty good. He pitched in Korea for a while after being kind of a 4A pitcher before that. Are you buying his renaissance?
I mean, probably not. He's still probably a streamer, but I will say, like, from the limited amount I've seen, he looks better. He was a Phillies prospect, and something with the Phillies is his fastball just wasn't that good, and that kind of was his problem. It looks like and you've seen him more than I have, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like he's working more off his off-speed stuff and less off the fastball, and it's working. I don't know how long it'll work, but it could be a situation where in the short term, he's okay because major league hitters haven't seen him because he's been in Korea, and you kind of ride the wave until it doesn't work, which at some point it probably won't.
Yeah. I think there's a continuing trend, though, of pitchers that do better when they throw their fastball less. It seems like that's one of those ongoing things. Even with like Bobby Miller in his debut, first inning, he threw a lot of fastballs, and everyone's like, ooh, throws 97, 98, whatever, or 100 even. And then it's like, well, I did better once they stopped calling fastballs. Yeah. So go figure.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a sequencing thing. And you're right. Like, whenever I look at the graphs, or fan graphs, that's what you see. You see pitchers, a lot of pitchers, it's not all the way down, but it's down like 5-10% on the fastball, and then, 5-10% up on everything else.
Indeed. Right. And you're right. It is sequencing. It's trying to get mapping, it's trying to get the tunneling right, so people think it's the same pitch and all that. So there you go. I think that'll cover it. Make sure to hit up Mike Gianella on Twitter at Mike Gianella. Hit myself up on Twitter at Jeff_Erickson. Of course, check out both Baseball Prospectus and RotoWire. You can check out RotoWire for the RotoWire free trial at rotowire.com/pod. Mike, awesome talking with you today. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I hope to have you on our podcast sometime. I don't think we've ever had you on, so we owe you a guest spot.
I'd love to do it. And that's Flags Fly Forever. Make sure to check that out where you find your podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. 2-Star Starters coming up tomorrow with Todd and Clay. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Take care.